work with in the years to come. But it's changed dramatically, even in the last 5 years. And so it's brought about all sorts of ethical issues, and I'll talk about that later on. But to put it in perspective, you've got to understand that there's ethics associated with what you do anyway. So what I'm going to talk about is just general ethical behavior and leading into AI. And as I say, that's a new area that's coming out. If you want to know about AI, we've got people in our school who are really good at that. Roy Forbes, Konganani Tutu, and Dean Barrett are the three who are sort of leading the AI development in our school, I think. They want to know all about AI. I'm not the expert. I pick it up as I go along, and I've just got to be aware of it myself, as you have to. Okay, so I'll talk about what's called plagiarism, which you may or may not have encountered, and how you've got to avoid it as well. So that's really what I'm going to talk about, is integrity in this age of AI that we live in now. And you notice right at the bottom of my slide, I'm actually giving credence or thanks to people who basically helped with this. So going back about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, the school actually gave this sort of event to our honours students. And we had a 3-day event, and I spoke on something else at that point in time. I can't remember what it was. But Helder Marx, who used to be in our school, gave this talk on plagiarism at that point in time. Obviously, I've had to update what he said and also change it, just because I'll change it to what I want to say. And but again, you notice that I'm giving thanks to him, and that's one of the important things whenever you give presentations or you give you're talking papers and or you give write papers and so on, is that you've got to identify who the sources are of your information. So that's why I've actually thanked him there. Okay, so ethics in scientific writing, it's about publications that we're talking about, but I'm going to show you the types of errors that people can make when they're quoting things, and you'll see it as it goes along. So in ethics in writing, whenever you've got a project, which you've all got, you start with an idea, hypothesis about what you want to do. You then move on to designing the experiment to either prove or disprove what you're saying. You then do the experiments to figure out if it's correct or not. You can interpret the results, and if you're lucky, you get data that you can publish your data on. And all of these areas can lead to problems with your eventual paper that you're writing, as you'll see later on. You could have a problem with your experimental design. You think it's great, but in reality, it's going to lead to the wrong data, which you think is correct. You could have the wrong way in which you actually design your experiment. These are the sorts of things you've got to watch out for. More important is is to interpret your data. All these slides, you can have it as they're all available afterwards. So you can take notes, but don't try and follow everything as I say it, because the slides will be available. So you can have these forward, and then of course there could be an issue with your publication that what you're saying is something that's already there, and you're not giving credit to what's been done before. So all of this really comes back to the scientific literature. When you're coming up with your idea, you read the literature, you say, aha, or your supervisor has, and said, aha, there's a problem that we can try and solve here. And so you look at the scientific literature to come up with your hypothesis and your design experiment. That's what you've all been doing. So what I've said here is pretty much what many of you've done. For the people who started this year, maybe it's something they're still learning about. But for the more experienced students, they'll know what I'm talking about, various ideas. And the whole issue here, and this is the point I'm trying to make now, is that we're assuming that authors are honest and the data interpretation is correct. And also when you publish, that the reviewer did their job. In other words, when you put a paper in for publication, it goes through an editor who then decides it's going to go to referees. And if it gets to the refereeing stage, you're hoping that the referee will look at that, or the examiner or whoever it is that's reviewing, the reviewer, is doing a good job to make sure that the data you're presenting to the literature, in the literature, is correct and okay. The problem is that if you put something out that's wrong, it's okay if it's a mistake, but it's not good if it's a fraud issue. Because once it's in paper, your reputation is out there. So you've got to be very careful about this. That's really the message I'm passing at this stage. So in ethics in scientific writing, these are the types of things we've got to recognize and respect in terms of the way we write our paper. You've got to put in where you got your money. In other words, at the end, always in a paper, you'll see we thank X and Y for the money we got. That's part of what you do. Our reputation, of course, is up in the air if we put out the wrong type of stuff. So we've got to be sure that what we're writing is correct. Our career is influenced by this. You make mistakes, that's okay. Making a mistake is not a problem. But it's when there's issues of what's called plagiarism, which I'll talk about, and fraud, which are real problems. And today with AI, this sort of issue is really becoming more important. Your future scientific work is going to be influenced by this as well. This is what you've got to encounter. That's what I'm trying to tell you, is that when you read the papers, when you write the paper, you've got to be very careful. It's not a problem, but you've just got to be aware of this. So, publishing. We now come to the fact, okay, now we know that there are all these things you've got to watch out for when you read the literature, but what issues of ethics now. So, this is some thoughts here. We've got this publish or perish mode at the moment. If you don't publish, you're not recognized, you don't get money for what you're doing. If it's money, it could be your reputation, build up a reputation. So promotion. In the South African system, it even relates to your NRF rating, which allows you to get money, bonuses, the university thinks you're great, and your reputation. And actually, I just put at the bottom here, the list of low-ranked publications did not enhance your CV. So you've got to be very careful where you publish as well. It's not to say that you don't publish in journals that are less known, but you need some good publications as well. There's nothing wrong with this at all, but you've got to be careful that you don't only have publications that are just run-of-the-mill. You need some novel ideas in your work. Right, so when we come to publishing, there are two types of articles that you can publish, two types of ways of publishing. And this is the one that's causing all the problems today, is this reader pays. The author pays. So the old style of publishing was this method here, the reader pays. So what you do is the university library pays, or you get access because you have a personal subscription to a journal, they allow you access. And if you go back about 10 years ago, all journals were of this style, 10, 15 years ago. So the university library would pay so that you could read Nature or any Carbon or any of the journals that you publish in. So the way you got access to that is that the library was paying for subscription so that you could read the articles. If your library didn't have access to that journal, you had to pay, and you paid a couple of hundred rand for an article. It was very expensive. You could write to the author and get a free copy. That was acceptable. But in principle, you couldn't get access to those articles if you had to pay for them. But what's happened in the last 10 or 15 years, and it's the whole move, so this is sort of going out, if you like, to a large extent. This is the one that now works. This was a paper copy as well, so you could get paper copies sent to you in the mail or PDFs sent to you by email. Nowadays we've moved to this method. to a large extent. I'll show you the data to support this. It's online only, and the author pays, and typically a paper, that should have been $500 times 2, 10,000 Rand. Yeah, it's around about 10,000 Rand they're going to charge you for publishing. Okay. Where do we get that money? You don't have 10,000 Rand, so you're not going to pay for it. So it's your supervisor who's paying for this, or the university. The university now has set up a scheme where they're paying less of this. So there's less money going into the journal so they can access the journal, and more money now going in so that you can pay for this. So the university is supporting payment. And the move is to open, but open brings problems. Okay, and that's what I want to mention about now. So it's how you're choosing a journal. So as I was saying, you're going to open journal, and now you've got to choose a journal. So how do you choose this journal that you want to publish in? Your supervisor, to a large extent, is the one who's deciding, but you yourself are reading and you get a good feel for what's going on. So by reading the literature, you get to know what you're reading, the journals you're reading, tells you about the journals you want to publish in, because that's the readership you want. You know, so if you're working in magnetic properties or something, or if you working on the synthesis of a sensor, then you want to go to sensor type journals, because that's the readership. You're reading, you want them to read your articles. That's why you do it, basically. So it's a sort of give and take type thing. So it's important then that you choose your audience, because if you put into a journal that, say a sensing journal, that was with an ethyl group on it, now you come up and you work with an isopropyl group. It's not very novel. You can publish it and it's good work, but the novelty level is low. So you've got to work that out for yourself, how novel it is relative to what you've read. And that determines what journal you choose and its impact factor. And I think most of you know what an impact factor is. It's a rating or a ranking of journals in terms of how they are, how the authors reference them. So the more references that you get, the higher the impact factor of the journal. So the journal itself, if it's being well, the readership is constantly referencing them, the impact factor goes up. So journals like Nature, Science, Angewandte Chemie have high impact factors because they've got novel work and people are reading the work and they're quoting them. So the impact factor goes up. The impact factor is not the only factor. It's normally, if you choose a society journal, and I'll give you an example of this, it's the South African Journal of Chemistry. It's got a low impact factor. Impact factors typically of 10 and above are very high. Impact factors down at about 1 or 2 are low. Below 1 or 2, they're out there. And it's not bad to publish in those journals. It's not an issue, but you need some higher impact factor journals in your career to go ahead. So usually a society journal is totally reliable. There's no fraud associated with it. The refereeing is good, whether it's South African Journal, Ethiopian Journal of Chemistry is good, a bulletin of chemistry in an African context. There's a journal called Chemistry Africa. So within the African continent, there are good journals, reliable. They may have low impact factors because they're not as visible, if you like, to the general public. But then you've got American Chemical Society, the Royal Society in England. They are good, reliable journals. Then you get to Elsevier, Wiley, and so on. The pay for they make money out of it. Well, all journals make money, otherwise they wouldn't publish. And when you go to journals like published by Elsevier, they're all very good, Springer and so on. But even there's a conflict between the society journals and these for-profit journals, and it's a publishing game. They've got to make money. So this is how you choose your journal. Then read the literature. This is the key issue. Read the literature. Figure out what you're reading, because that's most likely where you want to publish. But your supervisor should help you as well. Okay. So online publishing. What's the problem with it? Because this is where the issue is now with fraud, basically. So the development has led to an explosion of new online journals, some of which are called predatory. I'll talk about those journals now. So when do you need to start a new online journal? And people do. An idea, a computer, and a bank account. That's all you need. You can start a journal. So you can see the problems that are arising, because this is making money. And so you've got to be careful when you publish that you don't publish in one of these so-called predatory journals where the focus is just on this, bank accounts. And if you look at the number of publishers in the open market, 2011 there were 18. By 2016 there are 900. Then we look at something I just took from Google. I did a query 2 days ago. Google query, how many online journal articles published in 2023? In 2023, over 9 million open access. Remember, it's more than chemistry. It's the medical professions, the accounting profession, and so on. Journal articles published globally, according to Wiley. This figure surpasses the 8.4 million published in 2022. And 0.6 have gone up. Springer reported publishing 183,000 articles 2023 and lists over 21,000 journals now. Remember, I just go back. Here we had open 2016, 923. By the time we get to 2023, we're 21,000 with 11 million articles recorded. So it's a massive industry. Ignore the science. This is an industry that's out there to try and make money. And you then have to maneuver yourself through this and figure out where to publish so that you don't get caught in these predatory journals that all they're after is money and your article just disappears. And it may actually be bad for your reputation. So, what's the issue? This is the big issue. I mentioned it with money. You can see how you can make money out of this. Money is made by publishers. The rise of the predatory publishing house. Okay, so if you take a publisher who's got 100 type of journals, and that's not unusual, Wiley has thousands, Elsevier, even RSC has 100, not hundreds, but tens. And say you've got 20 titles per journal that you can get in, and you're charging $200 an article, which is 2,000, 4,000 Rand, which is low in that sort of area. That gives you 400,000 Rand, $400,000. About 7 million if you convert it to rands. And the publishing costs are only 10%. That's a big profit. 7 million Rand you're getting if you've got this sort of background. And there are predatory journals out there that fit this purely for money. And you've got to be aware of them. Your supervisors hopefully are picking it up as time goes along as well. So, who's most at risk here of this publishing? Because they constantly, I don't know, within your mailbox you get these requests to publish all the time. Every day I open up and I get 10 or 20 requests to publish in a journal. Some I've never heard of, some I know, and they're purely out there for money. And that's me, so you're going to be at risk here because I just click and delete. But don't get caught by saying, oh, they're asking me for a paper and I've got some work. That's probably it's predatory. Talk to your supervisor before you do anything. So who's the most at risk here? Young researchers, because it's a way of getting your articles out. You've got something ready to go, and here's somebody who's offering you a low price to publish. Researchers in developing nations, and that includes us. Institutions where publications are needed for graduation. And even here at WITS, we've got this issue, which is a tricky one, because to graduate, you've got to publish 2 articles. And what it generates is a lot of time, it's good stuff that's been published. But every now and again, there's this requirement to publish before you graduate. And you want to get it out there. And it's not good stuff. And it's not here, it's all universities in South Africa. And the consequence is a lot of junk gets published because of this. It's not that it's bad, but it's got its problems associated with it. It forces people to publish stuff they shouldn't, basically. So where to publish? Talk to your supervisor or other staff. They can advise you and tell you so that you don't get caught in this trap. Go for reputable journals. Society journals, you're fine. If you publish in a society journal, RSC, ACS, it's fine. And the established journals, Elsevier, Wiley, and so on. So you've got to be careful about the ones that are not established. And again, your supervisors hopefully can help you here. So, just to show you, you may think that what I've just said is just, oh, well, there are predatory journals out there. South African authored articles in predatory journals. Okay. This was taken 2017. Total, 476 articles in this predatory journal from South African authors. Okay? Mostly, we can say no chemistry here. So we're okay. Chemistry usually is okay. Our South African Journal of Chemistry is fine. There's no problem with it. But you can see in all these educational sciences, economics, corporate ownership, human ecology. And these are the totals. Here's the totals of the number in predatory journals that South African authors were publishing in. Just South Africa, just to give you an example. So there's a minefield out there. Fortunately, it's been picked up, and you can see the trends now, 2005 to 2018, is going down. So there's a tendency now that, we had all these articles that were in predatory journals now dropping down as the years go by, because the NRF is seeing this and not supporting researchers who publish in these journals. But it's not only, I give South Africa because I wanted to shock you with South African stats, but it's worldwide. This is a worldwide phenomenon of predatory journals. And if you look here, this is data sampled over 200 so-called predatory journals. India is bad. United States, you think, oh, the States are doing great work. No, it's them. Nigeria, Egypt. Fortunately, South Africa is so low down here, we don't count. But the others, these are serious issues. India was bad. They've really done something now and they've changed it. But the United States, because they go for these high impact factors, and there's a very aggressive, you've got to get good journal articles in Nature and so on for your career to progress. And you publish stuff which is wrong or it's flawed. And that's why the US and all these companies, so it's not a specifically South African issue, but South African authors are as guilty as the others, but maybe not quite as bad. So, some thoughts on these predatory journals. There was a Beale's list listed, and you can check that out. And this guy, Beale, was a librarian in the States, and he developed this list of all what he classified as predatory journals. He looked at the editorial listing, he looked at the publications that were coming out. And so you can go to this site. It was developed by Jeffrey Beale, but he was sued because the companies, were suing him because they said, no, he can't do what he's doing. So he stopped his list. But nowadays we have what's called Retraction Watch. And man, you should see the listing in here. It really looks at old publications, and all of a sudden, all these things are getting retracted, a lot of articles. And it publishes its findings. So I get, on News 24, I think it is, I've got a little website. I keep getting these articles from Retraction Watch. Go and have a look. And it's bizarre. You think people are good people. They're bad scientists out there. And so you just got to be on be careful about this. You do not want your publications to land up here. That's for sure. Okay. Sure about that. So, you get predatory conferences. Okay. Conferences, you think you go to a conference and that's great. So, objective to make money. As it is with the journals, it's money making. And you've got to be aware that it's a publishing to make money issue. Bogus content, pay a registration fee, submit an abstract, get an airline ticket, book a hotel, travel a venue and discover no conference. It happened to a WITS staff member about a year ago. They went to San Diego. They arrived, there was no conference. This is a staff member of WITS. This is a genuine case. The other hoax, and this is one you've got to be careful of. You get invited to give an oral presentation at a conference. It's wonderful. Somebody is writing to me and saying, we like your work, we've seen your publication somewhere, come and give an oral. I mean, it appeals to your sense of ego that somebody's actually writing to you. But you land up at the conference, fully organized, no standards, no peer review, no audience. But they're in wonderful places, Alaska, Hawaii, and so on. And you go there for a holiday, basically. That's what happens. They choose this. And it's genuine. Eh? I mean, this is what you've got to be on careful. And I don't know if you do get that yourselves, but I'm constantly barraged with go to this conference, go to that conference. But there are good conferences. And if you talk to your supervisor, the society conferences, always good. You know, South African, we're organizing our own one coming up in December here. And you can be sure it's we're getting good people to come and talk, a good audience. But in the overseas ones, they're really great ones. I go to the catalysis ones and I know which ones to go to. But I'm invited to these other catalysis ones because I've published. And they say, come and give an oral. And I don't know, it's in Turkey or something, beautiful place, I'd love to go. But I don't trust the organizers. You know, I'll go for a holiday, but you know, I'm not going to get any scientific value out of it. You go, you want to be in a nice place. You want to go to Hawaii, but you want to go to a good conference in Hawaii. Okay, so just be careful about this. So not only journals, but conferences. Eh? So we come to AI. I hope I'm not taking too much time. Am I on time? What's the chunk of time? Okay, I've got about 5 slides to go. Okay, so AI, and it's used in publishing. And this is another minefield that we're getting into. Because the AI can really write articles for you. So nowadays, when you write a paper, we actually put in, so we always write a letter to the editor saying why they should publish your work. And now you've always got to put in, I used AI or I didn't use AI. And I used it here, but not here. So you have to do that today. So there was a really good article that came out that I read, you can see a couple of days ago. I thought, oops. In the conversation, which I don't know if any of you get the conversation. Anyway, it's a sort of blog that comes out. And it came out June 26th, so not that long ago. It's a really good article. Can academics use AI to write journal papers? What the guidelines say. And so I've used this as the basis for what I want to talk about. So the key is, and this is the real truth, AI tools are here to stay. Let's deal with it constructively and collaboratively. We're not saying don't use it, but you've got to use it properly. So how did we get information, or what's the history behind AI in writing papers? And if you think about it, it's personal interactions. You get to talk to people and you get ideas. You sit in a tea room and you talk about something, you get an idea, you put it down in paper and do some work. You read papers, as many of you do. You attend, that's why we attend conferences. You go there to pick up ideas, listen to other people and say, aha, he's done that, but I'm doing this, and if I do a little bit here, I've got a paper coming out. So you go to conferences, workshops, you go to encyclopedias, that's where you get your data from in the old days. Nowadays you don't do that. You do Google searches. We were doing Google searches before AI came out, and that's just a variant, if you like, of an AI process. Web of Science is a great place to go, etc., and going on and on. But now we've got AI, and it sort of overwhelms all of this, and it takes over. So AI, it just refers to intelligent machines and algorithms can reason and adapt based on sets of rules which mimic human intelligence. And when you're using it, the key issue is here, transparency. If you use AI, say so. If you use it, that's fine. So that's the key message I want to give you from this AI part. Use it. AI is great for writing. We do, you do correction, got a Word document, and you click and say review, and it picks up all the errors that you've made. That's an AI tool, basically. It's just telling you, you should spell this correctly, or add a comma here. AI is just a couple of steps up on this, but it's the same process that we're going through, just getting better. So AI can generate text, improve writing style, even analyze data, and that's the key issue. You can analyze the data, saves time and resources, and this is why we use it, and why we use Google searches. It just made life easier instead of going through books or trying to do search yourself. It can do summarizing work, language editing, reference checking, and so on. It holds the potential for enhancing scholarly work. Our tools cannot be listed as co-authors. They are co-author. Author is responsible for verifying. You've got to verify all AI influenced content. Routine assistance does not need citation. If you do a word check, it's an AI doing the word check and so on. You don't have to do anything like that. But substantive AI generated must be clearly referenced. That's the message. So AI assisted content, predominantly written by an individual, has been improved with the AI tools. Now, generative AI is a whole different story. That's now when it's said, it draws content from various sources, such as this, and user-generated data. You can never be sure about the authenticity of the work if it's generative. Or AI hallucinates. That's when it makes up things. And there have been cases where lawyers, for example, have got data from AI and it's hallucinated, and there's no case, that they're talking about. Or data that they say somebody made compound X, but in reality, AI just made it up. So you have to check, once you get your AI data, go back and check that the references that AI has generated are real. Hallucination is a serious issue at the moment, making up stuff in AI. And also maybe plagiarizing someone else's work or infringing on copyright. So you've got to check. I don't want to talk about this. It's just that. So these are articles. So there were a couple of blogs I saw, and I just thought I'd just take some words of people who are using AI and they're trying to figure out what to do and what not to do. And there's a guy here, and this is just a recent article. It hallucinates. This is AI. It was used, and this is why it's good. It was used successfully to accelerate the development of RNA vaccines during COVID. And the details being used to interpret CAT scans, X-rays. It's going to put people out of business. The people who look at X-rays, AI is much better than people looking at X-rays and figuring out what's going on. This is for medical X-rays. It's been used to write computer code much quicker than humans. So it's good. AI is a good tool. If you ask a tool for reference, it will give you a few good references. If you ask to expand it, it will not infrequently give you a few that don't actually exist. This is a guy saying from his experience, most of us humans can only hold a few dependent and independent variables in our heads. AI can sample 1 million parameters in ChatGPT. That's why we use it, because it helps us. But we've got to be transparent. Really good. Finding relationships between them, and a human would be hard pressed to find those details. In the old days, we used to do that. Now I'm being put out of work by AI. I can do things. When you're thinking about things, and that's how life goes. And then just using AI, another person, just to, what they're saying. AI appears to be hallucinating. Start completely over. If it's hallucinating, start again. Big thing about ChatGPT, it can do web searches much faster than we could ever do. It can summarize multiple websites in a single narrative. Again, verify. Be careful on how you structure your query, because the important way is the way you ask the question. If ChatGPT has to assume anything, or if your request is ambiguous, you'll get very strange results. So your questions to AI become important, without going into the details of that program. Make your query as specific as possible. And at the end of the day, to me, it seems the best way to regard it is as a tool. So we use it as a tool. The rest, put in the hands. So it just says use skillfully. It can be a real boon. Can also get you into a lot of trouble if you're not critical. I would not use it to make any important life decisions. So don't use AI for life decisions based upon its recommendations unless you can validate. It's like a paintbrush. Put in the hands of an artist. Gosh, so you get a masterpiece. Put it in my hands, you get a mess. Okay, so basically what it's saying is just be careful. So, and get ready to publish. Okay, so what I'm basically saying is that these things are out there. Don't worry about them, just be aware of them. But these are things we've got to deal with. AI, I've got to deal with myself now. I never used to have to. But now I've got to deal with it when, so for example, if I review an article, they always ask me, did I use AI to review the article? And I prefer not to, so that I can say, no, I didn't. And so I just read the article, I go and read some papers and check out to see if the article can be published. And I do a lot of reviewing. I must review 30, 40 papers a year. So you get that sense of what's good, what's bad coming in and out. And if you publish a lot, you get to know the system. Now I've got to start using AI these days, I guess. But I hardly use it, so I'm not the expert on that. With that, I thank you and I wish you well as you get ready to publish. My whole hour. But there may be questions. Then the public trust is a problem. And there are papers that have come out, for example, on vaccines, which have got nothing to do with us. But there are people who say vaccines are good and vaccines are bad. And then you start looking at the data and you interpret things. But the public trust is dependent on those correct decisions being made. So what are the issues that you've really got to be aware of? The first is the obvious one of fraud, that you've got to be honest in what you do. You can't just make up data, basically. And I'll show you examples where that's happened in the literature. There's this issue of plagiarism, and that is not is just taking somebody else's work and putting it into a paper without referencing it, basically. That's a serious issue. And that's one we've always got to be careful of. Self-plagiarism, I'll talk about that, what that is. It's a type of plagiarism. And now we've got this whole issue of AI to deal with. It's something new, and we've got to just recognize that we've got to give, we've got to show where our sources come from. That's the real issue. So this is what you do not want to ever happen in your life. And it happens plenty of times, that I'm going to show you. Because when you see, you put your paper in and then it gets published, and 6 months later, you get this coming through. So these authors here had their paper pulled back. Why? Because there was fraud involved with it. And it's not uncommon. So the problem is that when you read the literature, you've got to be very careful about the literature you're reading, because you might be reading stuff that's wrong. And you think you're going in a certain direction with your results. You read this paper and it says something and you think, well, they're right. But it's not. This is what you don't want to happen ever in your career, if you can avoid it, is to have a paper retracted. It doesn't matter what the paper is here, it's just to show you. This is taken from the literature, this picture. Here's an example of what you don't want to have happen. So I think all of you are aware that when you write a paper now, you have a supplementary section that goes with the paper. And the way we used to write papers a long time ago, all that supplementary information was in the paper. But nowadays, the paper itself contains the minimum amount of data that's important with your interpretation, and you put all the data into the supplementary information. The problem is that in this paper, what these people did was just say, never make up data. So this, unfortunately, went into the supplementary information. It was published. Well, not published. It was sent to the referees with this information. Emma, please insert NMR data here. Where are they? And for this compound, just make up an elemental analysis. Okay. This was genuine. It happened. So what I'm trying to tell you is just be careful when you read papers that the authors are doing the right job. And this is just taken from an article of Mathematics way back in 2013, but it shows the type of issue you've got to deal with when you're reading the literature. Another example was affecting your careers and so on. A botany journal retracts paper for at least one error. And this was taken from, it doesn't matter, there are hundreds of these types of articles. These are just a couple of examples. And they don't reflect on the people or anything. It's just the way things go sometimes. So in this case, South African Journal of Botany has retracted the 2012 paper because they claimed that a variety of herbal abstracts had antioxidant, oxidant, and antifungal properties. But there were problems with one of the figures because they'd been manipulated. So the figure was manipulated to enhance the result that they were given. Retracted. Again, after lengthy correspondence and careful consideration, This article again retracted at the request of the editor-in-chief, the author notified, and again it affects their career. Another example, chemistry paper in Science. Now, Science is one of the really top journals for chemists to publish in, and yet you get retractions even in these great journals. Expression of concern on unreliable data. And again, the same type of idea. Here's the expression of concern. And the details are not important here. But what I'm trying to say is there were problems with the data. The authors deemed the data unreliable due to uncertainty regarding the origin of the data or the manner in which the data was processed. There were real problems with this. Finally, just to show you, it's not only people that make errors, it's pharmaceutical companies can. And remember, you're reading this literature and you're trusting it. And this is the problem that arises. So Pfizer tracks another, this is one of the first one, experimental cancer study, drug study. So in this case, the study was and you find this in the medical area really, they do analysis of some data and they try and formulate some new hypothesis. And it's totally wrong because the data they've collected has been badly collected, due to experimental design and so on. And the paper is wrong, but, it gets into the literature. And this is just another one. But here's the real problem that can occur. Now, this I call real fraud here. So this is a journal that's more in line with what you guys do. Journal of Nanoparticle Research. Victim of an organized rogue editor network. Okay, so in this case, what happened is, in the editorial, we received a proposal for a special issue of role of nanotechnology and Internet of Things in healthcare. So the editor of the journal received this request to put together a series of papers in this journal, which is a reputable journal. It's a reputable journal. And what happened is that they found out that the supposed eminent academics who proposed the special issue had nothing to do with it. The organized group used these individuals' names and their email addresses to hack and manipulate the peer review process. To be more precise, in August 2019, they bought some similar domains, blah, blah, blah. All of the evidence points to an organized network that tries, in this case successfully, to infiltrate scientific journals with the objective of easily publishing manuscripts from pseudoscientists or less productive researchers who want to appear in respectable journals. So what they did is they put out this request for people to submit journals into the special issue. Some of them were genuine. They'd be people like us. We see this request, we're working in the area, we submit the paper. But at the same time, there's this group of authors who've done no work. But the editor is part of this group. And what he's done is he's set up a system where you can put in papers that are totally meaningless into this journal and get them published. But it was picked up. So that's the type of thing. What I'm trying to tell you is that out there are not always good people. There was an example, I haven't shown this on the slides, where going back, this is about 5-10 years ago, X-ray crystallographers can publish their data and they can put together the crystal structures into paper. Some of you have done crystal structures. What this one author did is that he just took data, say it was a cobalt complex with a certain ligand set, and it was a genuine structure. And then he put in molybdenum and tungsten and whatever other metals into this ligand set, but he never did the experiments. He just generated data, in his lab. And he published something like 70 papers with structures that had never been reported. But he eventually got found, because you always get found out on these things. So you've got to be careful. So all those 70 papers were retracted. 70 papers had been retracted. One author. So, this is the message from these slides I've been showing you. When you read the literature, very critically, don't believe everything you read. Be very careful when you're reading stuff, because it might be fraud and it might be junk, just useless data. Be honest and critical of your own work, because again, when you publish, people are going to look at your data and they're going to try and use your data as well for their studies. You've given them a framework into which to get a new set of data. Which then brings us, so you can see fraud is one issue, and there's not much you can do about that. You hope the journals themselves have good referees who pick this up. The editors are good people who would make sure that when you submit an article, the article has come from real experimental data and that it's genuine, because we're hoping for that. Why do people, well, I'll talk about it later on, people do this because of money. It's all driven by greed, and you want your reputation to be a good reputation, and so fraud creeps in. So the fraud issue, we really can't deal with much. We hope the editors can deal with that. But plagiarism is a different issue. Plagiarism is something that we all have to deal with and be very careful of when we submit articles. And so what is plagiarism? So here it is. It's the use or close imitation of language and thoughts of another author and the representation of them as one's own original work. In other words, you take paragraphs from another paper and you plonk it into your thesis or your paper without referencing it. If you reference it, it's fine. But if you use it without referencing, that's where the problem arises. That's what plagiarism is. Another definition is wrongful appropriation or purloining and publication of one's own of the ideas of expression of ideas of another. So it's really if you use other people's work, that is fine, but you've got to quote them. And that's something you've all got to deal with, because especially if you write reviews or your own papers, you've got to look at the data in the literature. So plagiarism is considered academic dishonesty and a breach of ethics. It is subject to sanctions like penalty, suspension, even expulsion. So there are issues that are associated. And people at universities get kicked out of universities because there's plagiarism. I'll show you some examples of that. It's not a crime as such in academia. It's a serious ethical issue when you do that. So it's not a crime where you go to jail. And it constitutes copyright infringement, which we'll talk about later. So, there's an example. Ethics in writing, plagiarism. Famous Dutch economist, doesn't matter who it is, embroiled in plagiarism and duplication scam. So what did he do? He had what's called self-plagiarism, which I'll talk about later on. Scanning embroiled in the cancellation of thesis defense by one of his graduate students in plagiarism. Against his graduate student of plagiarism, while those against him are for duplication. In other words, he was taking work from one paper, putting it to the next paper, and there was very little difference. And so that's when you plagiarize information of yourself. So in several places in the dissertation of the students, is plagiarism. The commission investigated the case, concluded there was a chapter that had been established on the basis of a workshop, took all the data from a workshop of somebody else's, put it into his thesis, and the reader gets the impression that the text comes from the author of the chapter, writes the committee. So, and this is quite a famous guy that was kicked out of the university because of this. He was using other people's data, or his own data, and moving it, and not referencing it, saying, I did this earlier in this earlier paper. So, how do we avoid it? Very simple. And all of you, it's very simple to get around this issue, but you have to be aware of it. And that is to avoid plagiarism. You must give credit whenever you use another person's ideas, opinions, or theory, any facts, stats, graphs, drawings, any information that are not common knowledge. Quotations are acceptable. You put a quotation mark, paraphrasing, and you can paraphrase. somebody else's work. That's fine. So the issue then is when you see other people's work, you've just got to that's why we have all these references at the end of papers, because we're trying to say somebody else did this and we recognize they've done it. How to avoid it? So this is an example from American Chemical Society that I'm giving you. The American Chemical Society publishes a lot of journals, and they've got in their front blurb on when you submit journal articles, they ask you to just read the blurb. For, after you've read it once, you don't need to read it again. But permission is needed to reproduce tables, figures, or text from books, journals, and magazines published by the ACS Publications Division. They don't mind you using the data, but you've got to give them credence or credit for what they've done. Permission is not needed if using data from the text creating the original is using data from the text to create an original figure or table. If you use somebody else's data and you manipulate it and you use it, you just say, well, you got it. But that's all you need to do. Once you've obtained, and you can obtain permission from journals, so you write to them and say, I would like to use your figure. And they will say yes, and just give credibility to it, or credence to it, credit to it. And you'll notice that the many figures, especially in reviews, they give, and they say it comes from ACS with these authors. That's all they want. That's all you've got to do. And basically, you just say reprinted, permission from whatever citation, copy here, and so on, American Chemical Society. Then you can use the data. But if you use the data and you don't do that, that's when the problem is. So, strategies for avoiding plagiarism. This will apply now. Put your stuff in quotations. Just, if you take a sentence that's really in language that you don't normally use, put it in. What I see, even myself, when I'm reading somebody's chapter, I can tell whether it's their language or somebody else's language, which is fine, provided some quotation. But what the problem is, sometimes you've got to go to the student and say, no, this is too similar to what is in the literature, and it just doesn't fit your style. It's not you, because each person's got a style of writing. And if you start using other people's phraseology or phrases, big words that you don't normally use, that's when the problems arise. So, but you can, if you put it in quotation marks. Okay? If you're taking words that you don't normally use, that's fine, provided you put in quotations and give a reference to it. Paraphrasing is fine, but be sure you're not just rearranging or replacing a few words, and I'll show you some examples of that. Read over what you want to paraphrase, cover up the text, close the guide, write out the idea in your own words. So I'll show you the next slide on that. Check your paraphrase against original text to be sure that you have not accidentally used the same phrase or word with information. So when you're taking stuff from the literature, it's fine. But you just got to be careful about that. And while we're talking about this, I just want to talk about self-plagiarism, because that's something that you've got to be careful of yourselves as well. Plagiarism is publishing only original research. This is an ACS thing, including some. ACS publication users, they cross-checks to screen submitted manuscript for similarity to published material. In other words, what you've got to be careful of is you write a publication using cobalt, say, as one of your metals that you're making materials with. And then you go and make it with another, say manganese. And then you look at the papers and they're identical, except you just change cobalt for manganese. That would be self-plagiarism. You can't just take the same data you've used. You can use that in a thesis, because that's how theses are different. But when you publish stuff, you just cannot just take the same paper and just everywhere you see cobalt and manganese, because it's the same paper, just with a different results. So that's not permitted. And then this is basically self-plagiarism, where you're recycling. It's called recycling fraud. It's the use of significant identical of your own work without acknowledging the one who's doing or without citing your own work. If you cite your own work, that's fine. And we often do that because we're working in an area and then we're publishing the next paper which takes you through, and that'll apply to you all as well. But provided you recognize that and you say, we did this work, and we got similar results. Now we're doing something similar. Then it's okay. But you have to do that if you want to go, look after your careers. And the author thinks that they said it so well the first time it makes no sense to say it differently the second time. It's not actually true. So this is how basically, if I'm reading something and it's similar to what was said before, this is really practical advice. You read the article. You then try and note some key points in it. In other words, I always see things as a pyramid, and there's one key point that leads to 2 or 3 key points and downwards. So you read an article, and you want to then summarize it for your introduction, or for your thesis, or it may be in the experimental part, not so much the experimental part, but results and discussion. Just take a break, just read the article, go away, have a cup of coffee. Then come down and see if you can write the key points, write what you read, using those key points, and generate your sentences from that. And check to see then if it just makes sense, that you've taken the stuff that you've read in that article and you compare it with yours and see if it makes sense. And I find that's the best way to do it, especially if you've got review articles, when you're writing a review. If you want to quote from the papers, that's fine, you put quotation marks, reference it. But if you read something, always try and take a break and try and rewrite it. It's difficult because sometimes the English is they're using strange words. But that's the best method I can suggest to use, is following this. Of all the slides I've shown, this is the key one, I think. So, how to avoid plagiarism. Just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, so you understand the issues. So, and this was, so if you look here, there's an article written here. It's the rise of industry, growth of city. It's a text from a book, basically. As new, larger steam-powered factories became a feature in the American landscape, blah, blah. You can read about this later. And if you look at this, and you look at this, it looks so similar. The increase of industry, the rise of industry, that's not a change. It's just a change of a word. The person has actually looked at that and then tried to change an odd word or two. And if you look further, the growth of cities, the explosion, the expansion, it's using the same words. It's not different. And even the sentences, with industry came the growth, with industry came urbanization. This, you can see that this is just like you've changed an odd word. This is plagiarism. Okay. When you've taken something like that, and then you've just written that, and you've taken it as your own words. So the writer's only changed a few words around the phrases, or changed the order of sentences, has failed to cite a source for any of the ideas. In addition, the paragraph is also problematic. It's changed the sense. Don't worry about that, because I haven't gone into that so much. As opposed to the same article, you go away and you write it like this. Fall River, where the Borden lived, the Middle Northeast, and blah, blah, blah. You can see it's quite different. Steam-produced production, shifted labor, and you look at the rise of industry, doesn't say much about that. So it's quite different. They've taken the key points and written this again. So it actually relays the information, uses his own words, and lets the reader know the source of the information. So you can see there's a reference here as well. So you can see there's, just by changing words is plagiarism. You've got to, as I say, the best way is you read the article, go away, have a cup of coffee, remember what you've read, and then try and write it down again. And that gives you the difference between this and this, because this is just you're reading that and you're just changing one words. That's called plagiarism. So just a few words on copyright, because it's the same type of idea. Copyright's just the rights that you've got. It's more to do with patents than anything else. Given to authors and creators to protect their original works, literary music, and so on, and including scientific ideas. Authors and creators have these rights to reproduce the work in any manner or form, to publish a work as not been published before, confirm the work in public. These are sort of generic items, but you've got to be aware of copyright because copyright gives the authors an incentive to create new work and to be compensated for their work. So, if you publish something and you can patent it and you can make money out of it, and somebody comes along and uses your patent, then without, giving you money basically for what you're doing, then there's a problem. So it's really to do with your control. It's your idea. It comes up with chemistry, especially when you go patenting. But it refers to writing a book, for example, in general, to music and so on, because musicians want to get paid for their money, for their ideas as well. And it's the viability it depends on the compliance, because the publishers themselves are going to lose money if they don't get paid a certain amount, because they're the ones who spend money publishing the data. Deprives them of income, and you can have legal action coming up as a consequence. Am I standing in front?
No.
Okay. So, publishing a paper. Basically, this is a cartoon from this fellow here.
A lot to take in.
Yeah, the slides will be ready. Anybody else?
I mean, we learn every day. But my query is on the, you mentioned this guy who made this structures.
Yeah.
And when you look at the structures, for example, if you're reading an article, it's not always easy to pick, to say, no, but this, unless you really expect, you can, pick this minor details. So this person had their papers retracted. I wrote paper and I cited this person. So what happens to my paper?
Nothing, because at that time you believed it. So what will happen is it will be, I think it must be removed from your record, if you like. But there's nothing that you've done wrong. In other words, you read the paper and it didn't have retracted through it when it was published. There's nothing you can do. So that's why they're getting sightings, but their sightings will be removed. In other words, you know how you build up a citation listing, basically, you citing and so on, and that'll be removed from your. So it won't affect you, but you may have a couple, because what happens is that in that paper, they may have cited your papers, and you'll lose those citations in your record. So nothing wrong with you, but you may find your citation record has gone down slightly, because you thought this guy was great, and you were citing him, and he was citing you, and so when he cites you, all those citations should disappear on your record. But it's not a fraud issue for you, just they're going to disappear. Yeah.
Just some comments on the presentation. That was very interesting. As Dr. Manok said, we all learn every day, so it's a good thing.
So do I.
Yeah.
I never stop learning.
Yeah. So quick comment here is that with probably what you have mentioned, that the school of the chemistry field doesn't appear on the predatory journal people. So it's maybe because of the awareness that was circulated some time back from NRF, for example. They said they publish a list of all possible journals that are accredited. So for them, for NRF, since they are our bosses in terms of money, so anything that you publish, if the journal does not appear on the list that they give to us, then it's considered as predatory. There is a higher percentage that is predatory. It can be a new journal that is just being in place and a good journal, but as long as it's not on the list, it's something that you should be aware that probably is a higher chance that it's a predatory journal. So maybe that's another thing that alerted, particularly me, if I want to publish, look into
have a look at
the list from NRF.
But sometimes, like there's new journals that come out that may not, and then you request the NRF to put it on the list.
Yes,
it's from a reputable journal publishing house, because they keep, so the publishers keep coming out with new journals, because what happens is the fields expand. So there didn't used to be so many journals in material science, and so there's specialists, so this Journal of Luminescence, which didn't exist 10 years ago, for example. It's a good journal, but it didn't exist 10 years ago. And so in 10 years, there may be new journals because there's new areas opening up. And so that list will keep expanding.
Okay, may I add another last one? Sorry, I know the time is really. Just to complement on the AI, I know that yes, we can't run away from it. It's here to stay, as you mentioned. But there are serious challenges. I think we had the discussion among academics. I'm sharing this with youngsters because soon you are the one who are actually embracing it more than us. So the challenges are that most of our students, even unfortunately post-grad, you are writing an introduction, you are using ChatGPT, you don't even know what the content of what you are writing, and you just say, no, because I'm using ChatGPT, I'm done with my proposal, with my introduction, because AI generated, I can trust that everything is fine. When the supervisor can also blindly look at the draft that you submit to them, and they say, okay, it's fine, it's passing. Then you end up making your full dissertation without even knowing the content of your dissertation. The reason I'm mentioning this because it's crucial. We've seen the trend with undergrad. So when we give an assignment to undergrad, what they do is that they just, especially those who are computer oriented, they just go and do that, like they ask AI, give me answers. So I will talk about something like that tomorrow as well in the introduction section. So what happened now is, yes, they will get all the answers needed. Obviously, me as a lecturer, I have to mark, and so they give the correct answers, they will have 10 out of 10. But now come the time for the exam, where you don't have your computer, you don't have AI to ask the answers from. Then it becomes a problem. You see students who are having 100% on assignment, on lab report, and come the time of formative test, they get 35 or 30%. It becomes alarming. It's clearly showing that no, at that specific moment, the student does not really know, does not even grab whatever that they are learning. So it's a waste of time. That discussion is still ongoing. I don't know how we can overcome that because most of our lecturers are encountering that, unfortunately.
I think you're going to find orals are going to come back into vogue, so that you sit with somebody and you ask a question and then you find out whether they've used ChatGPT or not. It's very difficult otherwise, because I've got to admit that when I get a paper to read, I assume the journal is checked for ChatGPT. I can't, and that's not my role. My role is to, as a reviewer, is to read the article and see, is it not, you know the area. So when as a reviewer, I know certain areas, fish traps, for example. If I get papers, I can tell whether it's new or not, just by reading the introduction and the final bit without even looking at the center bit. And you get a feel for a subject after a period of time. It takes a while because you've got to know that area, and you'll all become experts at that and be able to judge something when you see something new. But the problem is I can't tell whether the article was written with ChatGPT and whether even the data, I just assume the data are not fraudulent. And I trust the editor. So what happens when you submit a journal, it goes to an article, it goes to an editor first who decides, does it fit the journal? It might be that you've got an article, say, on luminescence, and it's in a carbon paper, it's got nothing to do with the topic, and you've chosen the wrong journal. And the editor just says, no, this is not right. They also look at it for novelty, and they say, well, we've seen papers like it before, this is not novel enough. So they reject it, and then you go to another journal, for example, because it's good work, but it's in the wrong place. So you've got this issue, not knowing nowadays whether something's been written by ChatGPT or not. I can't tell. And I trust somewhere, they've got to say it was or not. And the same when you write. I wouldn't be able to. I can tell sometimes by language because, using words that are not, that we don't normally use. I see these words and this, I don't use those words. What do you use them for? Sort of thing. So that you can pick up, but otherwise it's very difficult to pick up. It's impossible.
Of course, actually on this topic, so I was talking to a friend of mine who's in another field, at another university. So I think the question would be to all supervisors as well. And that person was saying that in the IT field for research, they use ChatGPT, so not just ChatGPT, but AI in general. So they can put in input data that they get and then draw meaningful conclusions from it. But then maybe they have to write the things by themselves. So as you're talking, the question that came to my mind was, what is the mood around doing something like that in the chemistry field, for example? Is it something that's acceptable? Because I can also imagine that if your work is novel, then maybe there's a fear that inputting it into something like ChatGPT and drawing out meaningful conclusions from it might lead to certain challenges, which is why maybe something that we haven't thought about. Maybe it's been thought about.
So, my view on that is that, so you use ChatGPT and then you get a new result. That's fine, provided you say, I've used, and then you need to verify it, that it's, because it could be hallucinating. So you've got to be sure that what it's generated is okay. But I don't see a problem if it's generated something that's absolutely novel. You say ChatGPT did this and it leads to a novel idea, and I can test it, or I've tested it and it seems okay. Then I think it's okay. But it's when you don't say it's ChatGPT and it's like, something you did, that's when the problem arises. And where fraud would be the subject. Provided you reference stuff, I think that's the key. How's that?
Yes, so I was just going to say to Tata that I think there are academic tools that use AI that can help you generate novel ideas. That's going to be part of my my presentation. But just the idea that you will have novel data, that for me is just like, there's a question mark there. What does it mean to have novel data? Unless if you're saying you've already done the groundwork, you think it's novel, you put it into ChatGPT. The issue is that how does ChatGPT actually process your data? Now, if your data is just purely put into ChatGPT, rest assured it's going to be stored in their servers. There's nothing they can do about that. They're training the model to be able to respond based on input. So your novelty might not be that great after that exercise. But there are tools that, as I say, like academic tools that use what is called retrieval augmented generation. Now, that is a different use case where you use the ChatGPT model on your specific data. That data doesn't go anywhere. It stays wherever where you keep it. Then that is actually a good tool to be able to, let's say, I don't know, generate ideas, put in 50 references within 10 minutes, you have an idea of what's been done in the field and how you can actually contribute to that. I think that's more useful than just simply using, let's say, ChatGPT or Gemini. There are ways of getting access to that. I think I'll speak to that.
Good. The example that the person was giving me was that they had interviewed different people. And so after interviewing the different people, they drew up a list of questions, they got a list of amount of data, then they put that into AI, and then they asked the AI to draw any conclusions or any links that they might not be able to spot from that. And then from there, write whatever it is that they get in their own words. So that's something that I was wondering, like, how is that seen in the field of chemistry? Like you said, there's probably a big fear that if your work is something that hasn't been done before, putting it into the server and that is might be dangerous.
Yeah, I think the main thing is you open about what you've done. Yeah. Sorry, there are questions in the back. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the presentation. I got a question on referencing figures. For example, I use a figure, then I go on my own to a particular channel and I get this figure. And then I come and modify it to speak to what I want, or to speak to my writer.
Right.
So do I still have to modify?
Yes, so you're still just saying what you've done. You know, in other words, you modified. You can say modified, and we've done that ourselves. When you take something out there and you take their data and you put it in a slightly different format, you add your data to it or something. As long as you always give that quotation, then you're free. So err on the side of safety rather than don't. That would be my advice. Yeah. So in a figure, if you've taken stuff, just say the figure, you know, you've modified the figure from X, and then you clean. There's no problem with using other people's data. It's just saying you need to clean. That's the key.
The last one, you said that it's really good, in a situation where you're looking for a particular structure, and then you go to join the structure is given in this particular format, and then you go to another journal, you get the same structure, but then it's written, it's drawn in different ways. Then you go to the part journal, you see you're looking for the same, but it's not really communicating with this. So in this case,
I always go and quote the original. You know, so the other formats, you know, provided that's the key one that's been used. I go to the original. Because if they, like you would modify it and someone might modify yours, you will say it was taken from, as long as you have a reference to something, but I always go for the original. And that's the same even if when you quoting references in paper. Sometimes go back to the old literature. Not only when you want recent journal articles to show that you're up to date with your reading. Sometimes go to the older articles to show you know the area. Sorry, that's a good point that you just brought up. You know, when you're referencing, always reference the new literature. They want to see that you're up to date with your readings. But always put in some older stuff because it implies that you know the background to where people are. So choose some, you know, original, you've got to choose them appropriately. But the new references, you always want to show you're up to date. And the old reference, a couple of old references, just to show that you know the area. And that's a good technique to use, old and new, which it doesn't answer your question, but you made me think of it as something to say. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask in regards to what you're saying about AI. Because you're saying that it's not an issue if you state that you will use AI, say if you send your work to a journal. So in terms of that, if I send my work and then it's majorly containing AI in it, do they have limitations as to how much you can use AI?
So I think this may be something that Arthur may be able to say more about than I can.
Yeah, I think it just depends how you use AI.
Yeah.
So if you use it for language editing, things like Grammarly already, use
You don't even have to say,
do that. So that's fine. But if you're using AI to actually analyze your data, let's say you're trying to pull out statistics or something like that, you need to state how you actually, what was the input and what was the output for everything that you do in that case. So maybe you can write the whole paper using AI as long as you're transparent and as long as that falls within the quota of what the journal will allow. So I don't think there's a set number. Different journals will respond differently to the extent in which you use AI. And it's partly because it's a new thing. So the adaptation is not governed, so anyone can use it.
Yeah.
Anyone can use it.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think, it's a field that's developing, and I think Arthur's quite right that the rules may actually change with time as well. So what we're telling you, it's like articles are just from now, but in 2 years' time, there may be new rules on what's permissible and what's not. So when you do a lot of AI, there may be a problem. The journal may reject it. Is my guess at this stage. I think they wouldn't want that. They want to see, because there are no rules at this stage and they're worried. That we might take at this point. So be careful. But always say, I used AI to generate this bit of data, I used AI because it should be for analysis that you're using the AI. Mohammed, I think you have, sorry, a question. Sorry.
Yeah, I know the conversation can continue.
It can go on at tea time, I guess. And also, Arthur's going to talk about AI, so you'll get a lot more from him. Yeah. Okay, good. So we can stop.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, sorry.